Amid the spotlights, the strobe lights, and the emotional speeches, there is an invisible layer that escapes the eyes of most. Every year, millions of viewers watch the Grammy Awards expecting to see talent, art, and recognition. But behind the choreographed performances and flawless productions, there are patterns that repeat with unsettling precision. Sets that evoke infernal landscapes, costumes reminiscent of pagan iconography, and symbols that do not go unnoticed by scholars of ancient history. Nothing there seems to be just an aesthetic choice. There is a nonverbal subtext, yet loaded with meaning, present in every detail. It's as if, in the 21st century, entities forgotten by history were silently being invoked in front of the cameras. Could it be that televised award ceremonies hide references to ancient cults? That contemporary artists, intentionally or not, are echoing ancestral rituals disguised as modern art? After all, what is really being celebrated on the Grammy stage? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's go to the video. Few people notice, but the Grammy stage is not just a place for performances. It is built like a ritual structure, and year after year, certain shapes, symbols, and colors reappear, with slight variations but with the same impact. It's not just aesthetics. It's something that dates back to times much older than the music industry would like to admit. If you've seen those pyramids, glowing eyes at the center of a triangle, or figures with wings and artificial halos, you might think they're just modern visual effects. But these elements were not born in the 21st century. They have deep roots, buried in civilizations that used these very symbols in worship of forgotten entities. The pyramid, for example, is not just a pretty design. In ancient Egypt, it was a symbol of spiritual ascension, of connection with the beyond. On stage, when it appears illuminated with a central eye, as we've seen in past editions, the association with the Eye of Horus or the so-called all-seeing eye is inevitable. Does that seem random to you? In 2014, Katy Perry staged a performance at the Grammys where she appeared as a sort of priestess of an ancient Egyptian cult. She rode a dark horse, surrounded by flames and hooded figures. Her costume resembled Isis. The set was an altar, and the performance, though disguised as pop art, followed a symbolic narrative that echoed millennia-old religious practices. The point here isn't to say that she, or any other artist, is consciously involved with ancient cults. But when grand performances follow such a specific and recurring pattern, it's only natural to ask, why these choices? Why these particular symbols? Are they there by chance? These images that appear on stage are almost always the same. Triangles, eyes, serpents, horned figures, columns resembling ancient temples. And this extends to costumes, choreographed gestures, lights that flash as if trying to simulate trance states. It's not just art, it's symbolic language. And you know what makes it all more curious? The way these performances happen is not unlike religious ceremonies from antiquity. Ceremonial clothing, ritual dance, repetitive music, controlled lighting, elements of fire. Does that remind you of anything? In 2023, Sam Smith performed Unholy, wearing an entirely red outfit, surrounded by fire, dressed in horns. In the background, the scene resembled pagan rituals to the god Pan, a symbol of instinctual freedom, of nature's wild forces. And Pan, over time, was reinterpreted in some traditions as a demonic figure. Coincidence or intentional construction? These ancient rituals, both pagan and from secret societies, always had one thing in common. They used art as a vehicle. Dance, singing, enactment. The difference is that today we call it performance. But is it really that different? The Grammy stage, when seen from another perspective, looks less like a place of award giving and more like an altar. A modern altar with cameras and microphones, but still structured to provoke a collective emotional response. Why then repeat structures that were once sacred in the past? Many people don't know this, but the Grammy Awards are usually held between January and February, a period that coincides with ancient festivals like Imbolc, a Celtic celebration linked to spiritual renewal. Is that a coincidence? Or could the choice of date also carry an alignment with ancient ritual calendars? And it's not just visual. Some songs performed their feature phrases chanted with almost liturgical cadence, as if they were pop mantras. Deep sounds, repetitions, beats that induce movement. Elements that, in various cultures, were used to induce altered states of consciousness. In ancient history, sound had a spiritual function. Today, the beats of certain songs seem to seek the same effect, to stir the body and mind of the audience, to provoke deep reactions. Does that happen just because of musical taste? Wouldn't it be more reasonable to think that everything, from the lighting to the sound, from the set to the movements, is designed to create an impact that goes beyond entertainment? An impact that touches unconscious levels, that accesses layers we don't perceive? The choices of symbols on stage are not random. They follow a visual coherence that points to something greater. And when these elements are repeated endlessly, they gain strength. A symbol only has power when it is recognized. And if no one recognizes it, but everyone sees it, what happens then? These stages are like portals, not in the literal sense, but symbolic. And symbols, when activated in front of millions of people, create a collective field. A field where everything looks like a great spectacle. But maybe it's not just that. Why do the world's biggest stages keep echoing the same symbols used in ancient rituals? When watching certain performances at the Grammy Awards, the feeling of déjà vu is inevitable. Not because of the music itself, but because of the way everything unfolds on stage. Coordinated lights, precise choreography, gestures that repeat, and expressions that seem to go beyond mere acting. When observed closely, the structure of these performances resembles less a musical show and more a carefully scripted ritual enactment. The concept of ritual, by definition, involves repetition, intention, and transformation. In ancient times, this took place in temples, forests, or altars. Today it happens on stage, with spotlights, microphones, and millions of viewers. The difference lies in the setting, but the format remains. A central figure, the artist, leads a group, chants emotionally charged words, and moves the audience with rhythms that seem calculated. Doesn't that sound familiar? A performance in 2021 drew attention. Lil Nas X performed Montero, Call Me By Your Name, with choreography that involved a descent into hell, followed by a sensual dance on top of a demonic figure. The media treated it as artistic provocation, but the elements are clear: fall, possession, adoration. A classic cycle of initiation and transformation rituals, present from Orphic cults to Gnostic rites. In ancient rites, the symbolic enactment of death and rebirth was essential. The individual shed their previous identity to be reborn as something new. On the Grammy stage, this same pattern appears in costumes that change throughout the song, in sets that collapse and are rebuilt, in artists who die and resurrect in front of the audience. Is it just theater, or are we witnessing an update of ancient initiation practices? During these moments, there is also intense use of archetypes. The figure of the priestess, the fallen messiah, the wild spirit. All classic archetypes that appear from Sumerian myths to apocryphal gospels. And when these roles are assumed on stage, even symbolically, they carry an ancestral weight. They are reenacting stories that have been lived, told, and worshipped for millennia. It is worth noting that choreographed movements follow a geometric pattern: circles, triangles, spirals. In ancient times, these shapes were drawn on temple floors to channel energy during rituals. Today, these same forms appear with lights on the stage floor, guiding dancers like pieces on a symbolic board. Coincidence, or a purposeful revival of sacred geometries? In 2015, Madonna took the stage with a performance of Living for Love, dressed as a bullfighter, surrounded by masked and horned figures. During the performance, there was an unexpected fall, which was treated as an accident. But for those who study ritual language, falling in a public ritual has meaning. It represents the breaking of the ego, the moment of vulnerability before ascension. There's no proof it was intentional, but the symbolism was complete. The use of masks is another recurring element. In many cultures, the mask symbolizes the transition between the human and the spiritual. At the Grammys, masked dancers often appear, taking on animalistic, demonic, or angelic forms. And this is not just aesthetic. In ritual symbolism, it is the moment when the individual identity dissolves to give way to the collective or the sacred. Fire, smoke, and the use of vibrant colors, especially red and black, are elements commonly used to invoke or repel entities in ancient rituals. These visual effects are not just pyrotechnics. When used in specific patterns and associated with movement and sound, they create an environment conducive to collective catharsis. And that is exactly what we see in performances remembered for their intensity. Another curious point is symbolic inversion. Inverted cross, overturned throne, figures falling from the sky or rising from the ground. Inversion, since ancient times, has been used as a symbol of rupture, a challenge to established order, an evocation of the occult. At the Grammys, this type of representation is recurrent. But why would artists continue to rely on this kind of symbolic construction if they weren't trying to say something more? The answer may lie in the history of art itself. Since the Renaissance, artists have hidden messages in their works. Painters, sculptors, and writers use symbols to communicate ideas that could not be spoken openly. In the world of music, the stage becomes this symbolic canvas. And the Grammys, being the most prestigious stage in global music, become the ideal space to enact what must be seen, but not necessarily understood. In 2016, Beyoncé performed Formation on a set that evoked ancient African rituals. The gestures, the alignment of the bodies, the percussion, everything pointed to Afro-diasporic spiritual traditions. She was praised for the visual and political strength, but some saw a legitimate cultural invocation of ancestral archetypes. And if art is the new temple, then performance is the new ritual. Secret societies throughout history have always used public performances to convey their ideas. Freemasonry, for example, has symbolic rites based on enactments. The idea is simple. The public sees a show, but those who understand the symbols see something else. And this layer of meaning is exactly what repeats in many Grammy performances. It's important to remember this does not mean a satanic ritual is literally happening. But the structure, the symbols, the order of the acts, all mirror ceremonies that historically had a spiritual purpose. Today, perhaps the goal is different. Maybe it's entertainment, or maybe it's something in between. If the stage is a temple and the audience a congregation, what is really being celebrated there? Music, culture, or a modern form of devotion disguised as a spectacle? The Grammy performances are not just music. They are symbolic narratives enacted live. And when these narratives follow age-old ritualistic patterns, the inevitable question is, who's writing this script? When an artist takes the stage and embodies a mystical, masked, or hybrid figure, the audience often interprets it as a creative performance. But there's a question that is rarely asked. What or who is being represented there? Because when these symbols and archetypes repeat across different Grammy editions, with different artists and different styles, maybe it's not just about style. Let's get straight to the point. Many of these figures are modern representations of entities worshipped thousands of years ago. Some of these deities were once adored in rituals involving sacrifices, offerings, and music, lots of music. And even though their names have changed, the imagery still carries traces of those ancient devotions. So the question becomes inevitable. Could we, without realizing it, be watching symbolic tributes to forgotten entities? One name that frequently comes up among researchers is Baal, a Canaanite deity associated with storms, fertility, and at certain times, war. Baal was worshipped with intense festivals, ritualistic dances, and dramatic representations. Doesn't sound too different from a modern pop performance, does it? There's also Moloch, a figure known for being linked to child sacrifice rituals, according to ancient records. His symbol? A being with a human body and the head of a bull or ox. It's not uncommon for horned figures to appear on Grammy stages, in ritualistic contexts, surrounded by fire and shadows. Coincidence? Or a masked visual reference? Another strong name in this scenario is Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and fertility. Known for her constant transformations, Inanna descended into the underworld and was reborn, a narrative of death and resurrection present in many modern performances. Several shows portray exactly this: the fall, the pain, the rebirth. All choreographed, all very familiar. In Beyoncé's 2017 Grammy performance, she appeared pregnant, crowned, surrounded by golden images of fertility and divinity. Some interpretations pointed to references to Oshun from the Yoruba tradition. Others saw her as the embodiment of Inanna or Isis. What stands out is the pattern. The performance wasn't just aesthetic, but symbolic. An evocation? Maybe. A tribute? Definitely symbolic. What's most unsettling is realizing how these entities are not remembered by name, but by form, by posture, by the archetypes they represent. The artist becomes a channel for what is being enacted. And the audience? Watches, cheers, applauds, participates. Now think with me, why do so many performances evoke deities tied to fertility, chaos, death, and rebirth? Why don't we see references to more neutral, mundane figures? Because the symbolic impact of these entities is powerful, and the stage is the perfect place to tap into that visual and energetic force, even if disguised as entertainment. Occult scholars call this archetypal representation. When a modern figure assumes the form or role of an ancestral entity, they awaken, in the collective unconscious, the same feelings that deity evoked in its time. Even if the name isn't mentioned, the symbolic impact is there. Have you noticed how, in some performances, artists barely resemble themselves? Heavy makeup, outfits that conceal the body, masks or lights that distort the face. All of this reinforces the concept of transfiguration, present in many initiation rites, ceasing to be who you are to channel something greater. Doja Cat's 2022 performance brought this to the forefront. Body fully covered, almost monstrous, on a stage that resembled an alchemical laboratory. Red lights, beings on the edge of human form, and an aesthetic narrative bordering on the supernatural. There was a story there, but it wasn't told in words. It was symbolic. The same can be said for performances with multiple dancers representing shadows, spirits, or servants. This was common in invocation rituals, where dancers assisted the priest or priestess in calling the entity through coordinated gestures. On today's stage, it's become choreography, but the structure remained. When so many symbols align with ancient cults, horns, eyes, fire, pyramids, masks, poses of submission or worship, the question is no longer whether there's a reference. It's why that reference exists. What is being reenacted? And why? It may sound exaggerated, but the repetition of these elements, year after year, show after show, can't be ignored. Different artists, different directors, and yet the same symbols, the same archetypes. The natural question is there an invisible direction behind these choices? Some believe so, that the cultural industry is guided by hidden ideas, not like in conspiracy movies, but as echoes of ancient systems of power and devotion. And that stages, today, are the new kind of temple. A temple where no one notices the worship, but everyone participates in it. And if that's true, who are these silent honorees? They are not named, not announced, but they keep appearing. Disguised in costumes, hidden in symbols, stamped on the illuminated stage floor. We may never know for sure. But in the face of so many signs, ignoring these connections might be more comfortable than realistic. Because if the stage is a modern altar, then someone on some level is being worshipped. Success, for many, is simply a matter of talent and luck. But when you look a little more closely behind the scenes of the entertainment industry, a strange pattern emerges. The biggest names, the ones who reach the top, often participate in the same events, follow the same visual rituals, and curiously engage with the same symbols. Is this just coincidence or a kind of initiation? Human history shows that elites have always used symbols to set themselves apart. From ancient Rome to Egypt, from the Vatican to European monarchies, the elite choose the icons that represent their status. And more than that, they choose who to align with spiritually, even if that spirituality is symbolic or hidden from the public eye. In music, this pattern seems to have been adapted. Artists who enter this circle of extreme visibility begin participating in events, campaigns, and performances that follow a very specific aesthetic. This doesn't only happen at the Grammys, but the Grammys are the most visible stage. And what it shows year after year is that a kind of ritual narrative is being repeated. The artist transforms, embodies, is crowned or falls, and the audience watches, unaware that they're witnessing a symbolic enactment. Why does this happen? Why such repetition? The answer may lie in the structure of the industry itself. Fame isn't just a state of recognition. It requires maintenance. And, according to some esoteric schools of thought, what is gained on the material plane must be sustained through rituals, even if those rituals are disguised as entertainment. Some researchers point to the existence of symbolic pacts, not in a literal sense, but as agreements where the artist commits to an aesthetic, a language, a role within the system. In exchange, they receive attention, influence, and prestige. Not so different from what ancient kings did when they knelt before the gods, just updated for modern times. Public adoration also plays an important role. The more a figure is idolized, the more symbolic power they carry. In some occult traditions, this is called an egregore, an entity created by the collective concentration of attention and energy. The artist then becomes a channel for that egregore. And the stage, the altar where it manifests. This idea may seem far-fetched, but think about the crowds in a trance, the rehearsed applause, the synchronized screams. The artist raises a hand, and the crowd obeys. There's real power there. A power that transcends sound or image. It's pure influence. And to maintain that power, the image must be fed. Ritualized performances, powerful symbols, carefully planned aesthetics, all of this constructs the persona. The star is not just a person, it's a role. And that role must be sustained with symbols that reinforce its position. At the top of this chain are a few names. Celebrities who, beyond being artists, become cultural icons. Their images are replicated across millions of profiles, their words become trends, their gestures imitated by generations. This is more than fame. It's a modern form of symbolic divinity. And like every deity, it needs rituals, temples, and worshippers. The Grammys provide all of that. A consecrated theater, where each performance is watched like a modern mass. The audience sings along, cries, cheers, and rarely realizes they are part of a carefully assembled visual ritual. The cultural elite who control these spaces understand the value of the symbol. And they also understand the impact it has on the masses. By controlling the symbolic narrative, they control the collective imagination. And by controlling imagination, they shape the world. That's why, even as the years go by, the same elements appear. Horns, eyes, thrones, altars. They're not just fashion, they're markers. Markers that indicate the artist is in the game, that they've passed through the symbolic doorway, that they now have a role to play. Many of these artists say in interviews that their performances are inspired by creative forces they can't explain, that ideas come to them suddenly in visions, in dreams. Of course, creativity exists, but what if, in some cases, it's not just inspiration, but an alignment with something that existed long before them? The cult of image is not a modern invention, but today it reaches a level of intensity never seen before. Every like, every view, every share, all of it feeds a symbolic entity. The artist becomes bigger than the person, and the entire system depends on keeping that going. When you look at these stages through this lens, it's hard to see just a show, because the structures are rituals, the artist's avatars, and the audience devotees. The elite knows this, and maybe that's why they keep feeding the cycle. If power can be maintained through symbols, and those symbols are celebrated in front of millions, what exactly is being reinforced every year on the Grammy stage? Not everything is said with clear words. Sometimes what matters lies in the subtext, in the gestures, in the tone. At the Grammys, every detail matters. And for those who pay close attention, patterns repeat in speeches, in song lyrics, even in thank you messages. Nothing seems left to chance. The question that arises is, are we hearing what we're supposed to hear, or only what we're allowed to perceive? In many speeches, artists thank forces above them, or say they are connected to something greater. Some openly mention spiritual forces, universal energy, or guardians. Others stick to subtle gestures, touches to the chest, upward glances, or hand signs. And when these gestures are repeated by different artists at key moments, something starts to feel too rehearsed to be spontaneous. There are ancient hand symbols, like the gesture of two fingers together with the others apart, or the inverted triangle formed with the hands, that often appear in these speeches. For most, they're just poses. But these same symbols are documented in old grimoires, in rituals of esoteric orders, and even in historical documents tied to occult practices. What is being communicated? In the lyrics of songs, the pattern repeats. Many Grammy-awarded songs in recent years speak of transformation, fall, rebirth, light, and darkness. Some may say these are universal themes, and they are. But the way they appear, the sequence of verses, the repetition of words, resembles mystical compositions. It's as if some songs are, in structure, modern ritual hymns. A striking example is the song, Take Me to Church by Hozier, nominated in 2015. The song combines religious critique with a structure that resembles an inverted prayer. The chorus is repeated like a mantra. The song is powerful, no doubt, but when analyzed in its composition, it carries the same invocation format used in liturgies. Was that intentional, or the result of inspiration from somewhere else? In other cases, there are lines that seem cryptic, words that, out of context, could be associated with occult spiritual practices. Terms like ascension, awakening, key, portal, the mark, black light. among others, appear frequently in contemporary compositions. Alone, they don't mean much. But when associated with the rest of the performance, with the costume and the set, the message is amplified. Some awarded songs use numerology in their titles or duration. This is real. Songs with an exact length of 333 or 444, numbers with symbolic meaning in esoteric traditions. 3 times 3 is the number of triple creation. 4 times 4 is the number of elevated spiritual stability. Coincidence? Maybe. But why do these coincidences happen precisely in the most celebrated songs? During speeches, there are moments of silence. Long pauses, meaningful looks. In many cases, the artist seems to weigh their words carefully, as if speaking only to those who understand, as if part of the message is hidden there, between one thank you and the next. And that raises the hypothesis, are these speeches crafted with layers of communication? Moreover, there are patterns in how speeches end. Many conclude with a specific word, a gesture, or a glance upward. These gestures, repeated by artists who don't always have connections with one another, create a kind of visual liturgy, as if they're following the same symbolic doctrine without needing to explain it. Repetition is a common technique in rituals, and also in awards shows. Same formats, same songs, same phrases. It creates a hypnotic familiarity, and within that repetition, small deviations emerge, subtle, but loaded with meaning for those who know how to look. Some say these details are messages meant for those within the industry, signals among those who are part of the game, as if the speeches are, in part, rituals of belonging, words spoken for the right eyes and ears, and ignored by those who don't have the key to understand them. It's not uncommon for artists to mention they are not in control or being used by a greater creative force. Such words may seem humble, but they may also indicate a kind of symbolic surrender, a permission to be a channel, a vessel, or representation. And what about the songs? Lyrics that speak of pacts, shadows, voices, strange dreams, they may sound like fiction. But these narratives repeat in different styles, across distinct genres, from opposite voices. Why does the same type of message reappear in artists from completely different worlds? Over the decades, awarded songs have changed in style, but the symbolic content, that remains. The way pain is described, light as redemption, darkness as a source of power, all of it belongs to the same narrative body, that of spiritual ascension masked as entertainment. If you look closely, you'll see that some songs seem made to be heard like rituals. Repetition of choruses, hypnotic beats, verses that escalate in intensity like an invocation. Could some of them actually be sung rituals? These messages aren't explicit, but they're there, disguised as poetry, as performance, as glamour. And the more you observe, the more you realize that what's being said isn't just what you hear, it's what's behind the sound, between one beat and the next. If the speeches and awarded songs carry hidden symbols and ritualistic structures, then the Grammys are not just an awards show. They are a stage where messages are transmitted in code, and those who understand, understand. Among so many cultural events that take place annually, why has the Grammys become the center of these discussions? The answer may lie in the very role it occupies within the symbolic structure of contemporary culture. The Grammys are not just a music awards show. They represent the pinnacle of validation within the sound industry, a stage where talent meets recognition, yes, but also where a very specific type of narrative is enacted, a ritualistic narrative. Music, since the earliest civilizations, has always been linked to the spiritual. In Egyptian temples, in ancient Greece, among the Mayans, sound held power. Not just to entertain, but to heal, transform, invoke. Sound was a sacred instrument. Once you understand that, it becomes clear why music is the ideal channel for conveying deeper messages, especially when it's packaged with such production, aesthetic, and emotional power. Hollywood, in turn, represents cinema, dream, image. The Grammys represent sound, vibration, the invisible. One acts on vision, the other on hearing. And what happens when these two forces meet? A kind of complete ceremony, a fusion that harks back to ancient rites that combined music, performance, and mythology. This union was already practiced in ancient temples, and today is repeated on stage. The Grammys are not chosen by chance. They are broadcast globally, attract the biggest names in the industry, generate billions, and set the tone for cultural narratives. It is a programmed event, meticulously scripted. What is presented there echoes for months, influences trends, and shapes popular taste. And within that power lies the perfect environment to insert, symbolically, what in older times would have required a stone temple. A modern temple needs an audience. It needs image and sound. It needs devotion. And the Grammys deliver all of that. But what makes this connection even more striking is how the symbols used in the event match those of ancient cults. Triangles, eyes, serpents, hybrid entities, red and gold lights, and a ceremonial structure of opening, climax, and closure. There are clear similarities between how the shows are structured and ancient initiation rituals. Divided into stages, they begin with mystery, move toward revelation, and end in ecstasy. The participant, or viewer, moves through this journey like someone undergoing a symbolic transformation. Is that just a coincidence of narrative structure, or something inherited from much older traditions? Societies like the Egyptians, Greeks, and Sumerians used entertainment as a bridge to the spiritual. There was no separation between art and ritual. The songs were prayers, the dances, invocations. The stage was the altar. If humanity functioned this way for millennia, is it possible that modern culture didn't abandon the model, but simply disguised it? In Hollywood, people openly talk about the cult of image. But in music, that cult gains an invisible layer. That of sound is invocation. When sound, image, and intention align, the result is not just a performance, it's a complete sensory experience. And that kind of experience was precisely the goal of the mystery cults, such as those of Eleusis in ancient Greece. The Eleusinian mysteries were secret celebrations involving music, theater, wine, dance, and symbolic transformation. Participants entered a trance, guided by sounds and visions, to access higher realities. Today, something similar happens in large-scale shows with strobe lights, repetitive beats, suggestive lyrics, and audiences fully surrendered to the spectacle. The difference is that today, no one admits it's a ritual, but the effect is very similar. The repetition of symbols, the narrative cycles, the coded messages, it's all there. And when you look at the Grammys through that lens, the connection between ancient and modern becomes almost impossible to deny. Some scholars argue that the biggest cultural events today function as mass rituals, not in the traditional religious sense, but as mechanisms of symbolic control and reinforcement of values. The Grammys, in this context, are among the most effective, because they mix charisma, adoration, media power, and ritualistic structure in a single night. The Grammy stage, under the blinding glare of the spotlights, seems to simply celebrate music. But when you step back and observe the pattern, the symbols, the narratives, the gestures, the sounds, something larger emerges. A theater repeated for decades, built with elements that have survived millennia. And behind each performance, an untold story. A silent code. Maybe it's all just art, or maybe it's more than that. The line between spectacle and ritual has never been thinner. What we've seen here are pieces of a larger picture, where entertainment and symbolism walk hand in hand. Whether or not there is a hidden purpose behind it is something each person must observe with their own eyes. But when coincidences begin to pile up, maybe they're not coincidences anymore. This story is just one piece, and one day you might see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.